Good day. Welcome to the Strong Ambition podcast. And today we're going to dive into advanced training tactics that athletes need to be using with Don Moxley. Don Moxley's been on the show before. Go check out episode 75 if you did not catch it, because he has so much knowledge that he has in there. And we pick up right where we left off. Don was a professor at Ohio State and actually headed the department to oversee the wrestling for strength conditioning. And when he used his system to pay attention to the data to steer his directions, he led many wrestlers to national titles and even to gold medals at the Olympics. So we dive in a lot more into what we were talking about from the last episode. And I asked him to really dive more into the details of what makes really good advanced training, how you can use less weight and get more out of your strength training and power development. What does it mean to have good bar speed, and why does that matter to your strength? Why should you actually leave more reps in the tank and find out that you'll get stronger? What are some of the different strategies that boxers should be using when they're paying attention to, say, strength endurance? What are some of the things that all people should pay attention to when it comes to improving their cardiovascular system? And why would zone 4, which is the really high intensity stuff that people love and get an adrenaline rush from, why would that be bad? And he dives into why it would be bad and why it doesn't actually help athletic performance. And we dive into way more than that. Don Moxley has got so much experience and understanding. And as he likes to say, he's not a strength conditioning coach, he's an exercise scientist. And he nails down some of the things, especially talking about wearables and trackables, to be aware of your HRV and how that can dictate so much of your success. And so without further ado, here is Don Moxley. Good day, Don. Welcome back to the show. How are you today?
I am doing great. I'm really excited. I am currently down in South Carolina, but we're getting ready to drive back across the United States next week. We'll be out west by the end of the week, so little warmer here where I'm at than where you are.
Yes. As we were just talking off air, it is very cold here in Winnipeg, and that's great. I was actually going to ask you about like where you're at in your trip, because last time I chatted with you, you were still just starting to make your way across the United States. So have you gone completely across the States now?
We've crossed the United States 4 times now, and
Wow.
we're getting ready to do our 5th trip across from east to west. We'll come west. So we're going to go out to Las Vegas, and we're going to spend the holidays up in Lake Tahoe, California. But then we'll be back. My daughter coaches at the University of Pittsburgh, and we'll come back to watch her lacrosse season, and then we're going back into the Pacific Northwest after that to go buy property. We're going to go buy property either in Northwest Washington or out on the Oregon coast, but we've decided, we've been in 37 states in the last 28 months. So we've seen a lot, we've taken in a lot, and I think we've decided that we like that coast of Oregon and that very northwest corner of Washington up in the Cascades, Mount Baker area.
That's awesome. And what a great way to spend your life, just traveling, getting to know your country, and then to know, like, hey, you know what, we've seen a lot. This is the place. That's amazing. That's a great way to spend life.
The best part, Rylan, is we've been in 10 national parks in the last, now 16 months. I had been in 10 national parks in a year, but we've not been in any for the last, 4 or 5 months. But when there's people that don't get into a national park in their whole life. And I've been in 10 of them, and I have to go back and count how many we've been in total, but that's the best part.
Yeah, because you underestimate. I always said this when I first started traveling, because I didn't a lot growing up, and then I finally traveled, even just going to Vancouver, and then it was like, hey, I got to go somewhere else. I went to Thailand, and I was like,
sure,
it's like a waste of the world that you're living in if you don't see it in person. And
you're absolutely right. And
it's so different than seeing a film or a photo, because you're like, oh yeah, that's pretty cool, but like a picture's worth 1,000 words, a moment's worth a million. When I was in Thailand and I would just see these things, man, the feeling, the environment. And it was funny because I take a photo and I would look at it and be like, this looks like nothing that I'm seeing. So the photo to me in person, like when I took it, it looked terrible. And then when I looked at it like a year or two later, I'm like, that actually looks beautiful from what I'm used to now.
Right.
And so the actual experience is that much more potent and powerful. And I just think that's amazing. So let's dive into I want to pick up, make sure the audience knows where you come from a little bit, because you have an amazing experience as a strength conditioning coach And so why don't you tell a little bit people about your history as a strength and conditioning coach?
Sure. So I got into strength and conditioning back in the early 80s. As an athlete, I grew up on a big beef cattle operation in eastern Ohio and was a decent high school wrestler and was good enough to walk on the wrestling team at Ohio State. I went to Ohio State because I had an agricultural school, and I had every intention of going back home and feeding beef cattle for the rest of my life. Now, as a member of the wrestling team, I was one of those guys that used to cut a ridiculous amount of weight. I would cut from like 220 to 177 and get injured and miss an entire season. And the next year, I was probably 230, 240, cut to 190, got injured again. And I was like, wait a minute, because the culture back in the late 70s, early 80s was, if you want to be a good wrestler, you got to cut weight. And so for me, I was cutting too much. It was way out. So when I said, what do I have to do? And everyone said, you got to get strong. And so I had this really interesting convergence of mentors, not the least of which one of my teammates, his roommate was a guy by the name of Kevin Akins. And Kevin at the time had the third longest shot in the world. He threw for Santa Monica Track Club. And I'm over at their apartment one night and we're talking about strength training. And Kevin was a mountain of a man. He was gigantic. He says, you want to get strong? I'll show you where you get strong. So he took me to Lou Simmons's garage, the founder of West Side Barbell. So this is before West Side was West Side. So we walk into this garage. Here's this power rack that's made out of circular pipe that he had drilled and putting pins in. This was before he invented the back hyper machine. So part of doing the posterior, he had already identified posterior chain as an important piece of development. He had a board that we put up in that rack, and we'd strap 25-pound plates between our ankles, and we'd do reverse hypers out of the rack. So he invented the reverse hyper machine probably 5-6 years after that. And so I have that experience. I have the experience of a strength coach at Ohio State, but I also had a mentor there. His name was Ted Lambrinides, and Ted has now gone on. I mean, he works with the NFL now. But Ted was just a student of strength and conditioning, but he was more on the high intensity kind of stuff. So he was working with Dan, I'll think about his name. He was the head strength coach at Penn State, went on to the Washington Redskins, Dan Riley. So Dan was into this high intensity Nautilus style work. So I've got that contrast going. And then my third mentor at the time was a professor I had at Ohio State named Bob Bartels. Now, Bob was a swimmer at Ohio State back in the late 50s. He was a coach in the early 60s. And the majority of the U.S. swim team and Tokyo back then came out of Ohio State. And so he would tell stories in class about guys, Ohio State didn't have strength and conditioning at that time. I mean, they really didn't get strength and conditioning until the very late 70s. But he would talk about guys going down to the YMCA in downtown Columbus and lifting and seeing the benefit. So I had this really cool convergence of these three mentors, Louis, Ted, and Dr. Bartels. And I fell in love with human preparation and human physiology. So Ohio State at the time had a rule that if you changed your major after your sophomore year, you went ineligible because you couldn't meet this requirement called normal progress. So, but the beauty is Ohio State has both a med school and a vet school, and they co-numbered their courses. So if you had a mammalian cardiology course, it had the same number as the human cardiology course because humans are mammals too. So I was able to finish up my undergraduate degree in animal science while preparing to go to grad school in exercise phys. And so finished that up, did my grad work in 86. And so all of a sudden, I'm freshly minted exercise physiologist and immediately started working with some wrestlers in the area and then another big development that came is that about in 88 or 89, I got a call from the strength coach at Ohio State, Steve Bliss at the time. And Steve said, hey, we've got some ex-Buckeyes that are playing for the Chicago Bulls. Bulls, a guy by the name of Dennis Hobson, who was the NCAA Player of the Year, I think, in 86 or 87, and Brad Sellers. Brad was a 7-foot center who was my age, and they were up playing for the Jordan Bulls at the time. Well, their strength coach was a guy by the name of Al Vermeil. Al Vermeil is the only person who's both in the NFL and the NBA Hall of Fame. So all of a sudden I have this access, and Al introduced me to this thing called a Vermeil time machine. It was this device that he had invented. It was this little personal computer. And again, this is personal computers before personal computers. Okay. Right. This is, and you could put switch plates in it and optical sensors in it, and we could do authentic athletic testing. So you'd have someone stand on a mat and jump in the air. You measure their time, they're off the mat, you divide it in half, you multiply it times Bosco's coefficient, and you could get a distance. So I could do multiple jumps. I could jump someone 10 times in a row, or I could move them left to right to left, and we could see deficiencies there. So this was really big for me because it really got me looking at authentic athletic measurement. Listen, we had all this stuff going on in the weight room because Steve Bliss at the time was a Nebraska graduate. He was, it was, squats, cleans, and deadlifts, squats, bench, and deadlift. They're cleaning a little bit. But I'm like, wait a minute, bench press doesn't tell you anything about athletic performance. So working with Al got me thinking in terms of how do we assess authentic athletic performance. Listen, I was a lucky guy. I had these amazing mentors back there in the 80s, which really got me going and got a mindset going that while we're doing strength and conditioning, we're actually doing athletic preparation, and there's a difference there. And Lou, Lou trained strength guys. I mean, he trained the strongest strength athletes in the world, but he also knew. I went over to work out one day, and my best workout I ever did. Now I'm 6 at the time. I was 6 feet tall. I probably weighed 285, 290 pounds. And one workout one day I benched 480. I doubled 480 in that routine. And it was just the routine. That was just my routine for that day. And then the next day I came in and I squatted 840 for a double. So those were my two best performances. Now, when I would go over and train with Lou, those guys are rotating through doing 1,000 pounds for doubles. I mean, they were in a class different than mine. But the difference was, when I got done lifting, I would usually go run 3 to 5 miles. I would go wrestle. Those guys would go sit and load and recover.
Relax. Yeah.
So that was the difference between a really strong athlete and a strength athlete. So that was important to get worked out, and it was nice because I had the guys from Nautilus Leverage, which became Hammer Strength. So we're looking at again the Dan Riley concept as it related to high intensity training. So that's how I got started. Worked with people. I've worked with athletes since I got hired in 1986 to train my first athlete. He's a wrestler that went on to wrestle at Arizona State, came back and was a national champion at Ohio State. That was my first paid gig. And I've just been in the field ever since.
That's super cool to have such an incredible amount of experience, having all these different mentors that helped you out throughout it. Louis Simmons is a legend in the industry. Yes. He's the OG of, really understanding powerlifting to a different level, like you're saying, talk and posterior chain. And
what's amazing, Rylan, is that with Louis, I'll tell you, it was probably 25 years ago. I would go over to West Side often just to watch and learn. Because listen, Louis was a genius, okay? Mm-hmm. And just being around him, you absorb this stuff. And all of a sudden I see him they have this thing that they're hooking to the bar, measuring bar speed. And I'm like, what is that? And Louis basically said, listen, you can squat 600 pounds, but if you squat 300 pounds twice as fast, it's the same load. And I thought, interesting. And so I started, and this is when I started playing with velocity-based training. So I buy a Tendo unit from him and start doing it myself. I got to where I couldn't get the data from my Tendo unit into a computer fast enough because they didn't have the software interfaces at the time. So I was having to do it by hand. Well, I couldn't do it. Well, at the time, I was working for a company called Polar, the heart rate monitor company, and I had a really successful year. I made bank that year, and I had this big fat commission check at the end of the year, and I said, I'm doing a couple things, and I bought a tool that was called a Velotron, which was a bike ergometer that I could program. I still have it. It's in my rig right now, and my wife and I still ride it. But I also hired an engineer, and I made my own Tendo unit. We called it a Moxbox, and which we created. There was a serial connection, so the software was on the PC, and we were running. This is Windows 95, mind you. Okay, so this puts it in the time frame. But I could put filters on it. I could do all that kind of stuff, and it was incredible because when you start to understand velocity-based training, not the ability to load lower loads and get the same kind of, increase the speed, lower the load, get the same training stimulus, but you could also see exhaustion. That if we're doing a set of 8 reps, and you're doing a power exercise, well, if you're not moving within 90% of your best, it's probably not contributing to improve power. Well, we put filters on that and alarms so that if I pulled a personal best, it'd give me a beep. If I wasn't within 90%, it'd give me a boop. 2 boops in a row, you rack the weight, and I'm racking the weight so early. I mean, when I first started doing this, I thought, oh my God. I mean, where I would have normally done 10 reps, I was doing 3. But Rylan, you just kept improving, and it's all of a sudden it's like all we're doing is eliminating junk reps. Okay. Right. And I think this is what's so important that, I walk into weight rooms now and I see people training and I see them struggling with the weight. And I'm thinking, well, that's a complete waste of time and energy. Complete waste of time and energy. So being able to attach data collection to the principles of strength and conditioning. I mean, we did this with wattage on the bike that we trained with. We did this with using heart rate monitors. We did this using heart rate variability to measure recovery. So all of these things were coming together to help create data sets that help you, and I think that's what sports science. Rylan, I don't call myself a strength coach anymore. I call myself a sports scientist. Right. Now, every strength coach should be a sports scientist because all you do is create data, and you should analyze it and make decisions. We've just gotten to where with the right tools, we can collect. I collected 3.5 million data points on a wrestling team. Okay, so. And we could make really good decisions, and I could sit down with athletes and I could say, let me show you this, let me show you how it changed, let me show you what I want you to do. And it wasn't my opinion anymore. It wasn't me versus that athlete's opinion. It was like, okay, here's the data, buddy. And you can either take it or you can leave it, because if you leave it, I'm going to come back and show you the data later on that you're not moving the needle anymore. And all of a sudden the athletes trust you. They're like, well, first of all, when you're saying you can do less work and get as much improvement, everyone loves that. Right. And then on top of that, when you can actually predict, we got to where we could predict success. I could use heart rate variability to diagnose problems with athlete. We could use it to prescribe exercise loads and so forth. But I also got to where in 2018, when we qualified our whole starting lineup for the national tournament, we had 8 All-Americans, most in school history. I knew the two guys that didn't make All-American, I knew who they would be the first day of the tournament because they didn't have an HRV sufficient to be able to win the 5 matches over the 3 days that you need to do to make All-American. So that was what was kind of cool. But the ability to integrate data creation, collection, and analysis in the entire training process.
I think that's incredible that you're able to use that for predictions just based on HRV. And these HRV monitors are getting more and more commonplace.
They're really getting good. And people, your athletes are probably hearing about them.
Mhm.
Okay, listen, I'm not a fan of all of the monitors that are out there on the market. Some of them are great, some of them are okay, but there's one particular brand that's okay that you see on everyone's wrist, and they're raising the attention. So as a coach, you now have the ability to say, okay, that's not a bad idea. I'd like you to lean in this way a little bit more,
Mhm.
and Rylan, 5 years from now, it's going to change completely. It's like cell phones.
Right.
The
Yeah.
stuff we do with our cell phones 5 years ago compared to where we're going to be 5 years from now is night and day different.
Yeah, that's a good example. And that's actually a promising thing because I've heard very mixed reviews on some of these HRV monitors. When people get obsessed over sleep, I've heard that there's even this issue where people are having insomnia because they're worried about not having sleep, having a
Yeah,
wearable, and
yeah,
then the actual wearable isn't even tracking the sleep appropriately. So you could have what feels like a restful sleep, and you look at it, it's like, oh, you only had 60% of your sleep. It's like, actually, I feel great. So maybe I don't feel great. Maybe I'm gonna have a bad day, and that's actually like the problem. Is this is still newish technology, but you had mentioned soon the technology comes more commonplace, and it'll be more accessible for more people.
it'll get better. And listen, if you're an athlete and you're looking at this, get to someone who understands this. I mean, that's why we're having this conversation. That's why I do what I do. If you have a question about this, you want to reach out to me. That's
Hmm.
what I do. So but don't think you have to do this on your own. It's a mistake to get a piece of technology and think you can go to YouTube and learn. I buy something new on our rig or on my truck or something like that, and I can go to YouTube and figure out how to put a new furnace in my RV or how to put a new hot water heater in. I can do that. It's different when you're looking at wearable data usage and how to apply it, because it's not just the technical button pushing, it's also the physiological, okay, what data am I looking at, and also the psychological. A lot of these devices, they have real data and they have fake data. Sleep is fake data. Okay, it is an estimated routine. It may not be bad, but at the end of the day, it's not real. It's not like you'd get from a sleep study. HRV done right is real data. HR done right is real data. So being able to interpret that and then integrate it into your program is one of the challenges that an athlete or a coach has. But there's more and more people every day that are doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some brands that you recommend people look at for quality HRV monitors?
Well, if you're looking at HRV, the Aura Ring they're the leader. They're
I
by far
figured.
the leader. There's another device that is coming out of Amsterdam. It's called NowWatch, NOWATCH, nowwatch.com. It's a much more attractive device. When I worked for Polar years ago, we used to laugh about those old Polar monitors. We're in a tribe of your own. I used to sit on airplanes and watch people walk on, and if they had a Polar monitor on their wrist, it's like, oh, that person's an athlete, that person's a
Hmm.
runner. You could kind of pigeonhole them. Well, you know, some of this technology is evolving. The Polar monitors now are beautiful. The Garmins and the Polars and so forth. But when it comes to HRV, right now you have to look at Aura. And I believe NowWatch is going to come along. They're not quite there. Their device is excellent. Their software is not there yet. So if I'm answering that question, it's Aura Ring.
Okay, that's good to know. I actually just want to come back quickly to clarify something because you mentioned about the value of speed in power training, just because people
Mm-hmm.
need to appreciate this lesson if you're an athlete or someone who just has powerlifting goals. And I have audience of both. And I even have learned this dramatically in the last year when you talk about all of a sudden gains get higher with less work. So
Yes.
let's kind of break that down so people understand this whole idea, because you can get it in your head that you just got to train force, but force is only a part of the equation. So can you kind of elaborate for maybe an athlete or someone with powerlifting goals, why is it so important that they maintain speed in a bar?
Well, this brings up the concept of quality. okay? Not just quantity. You know, so much of our training is built on sets and reps, which is a pure quantity measure. And you'll say to someone, do a set of 10, and again, they'll get the first 3 or 4 in, and the last 6 look like shit. Okay, that last 6 did not contribute to what you're doing. You've got to make sure that the work that you're doing is quality work. And at the end of the day, when we train, we're looking to modify one of 3 things. We're looking to create a signal that's going to cause the tissue to grow and get stronger, which is typically a stem cell mediated process, okay? Or we're going to train to get the neural system. There's a thing called inhibitory response, that the first time you grab a weight, your body's going to say, whoa, what are you doing? Okay, and it may not let you have it. I remember the first time I ever benched 405. I had a recruit, and we were out in the weight training facility, and the day before I had thrown 395 off my chest. I mean, just blew it off my chest. And I was pretty disciplined in the fact that if I had trained 405, if I had tried 405 that day, who knows what would have happened. But I've got this recruit, and the recruit's over touring the facility and so forth. I'm like, I want, you know, because 405, you know, it's 4 big plates on each end of the bar. You know, it's a real milestone. Do a quick little warm up. I finally get 405 on the bar, lift off. It cuts me in half. I can't move it off of my chest. Okay, rack the weight. I am pissed. I'm just depressed. 305, and it's only 5 pounds difference, you know, from the day before. And so I go back 2 days later. Listen, just having the weight in your hand and feeling it tells your central nervous system, hey, you've been here before. And we have a ton of natural strength stored in our capabilities, but our body prevents us from hurting ourselves with this inhibitory nervous response. Okay? So going back to that quality, quantity kind of stuff is that when you're looking at the quality kind of stuff, you know when to get there. So you've got to load that bar every once in a while just to feel it. You got to let the body feel it. Listen, we know the role of eccentrics is that when you've got someone you know, if someone's rehabilitating and they don't have the strength to do an exercise concentrically, so what you do is you do an assisted eccentrics. You do eccentrics down, and then you help them up, and you do eccentrics down, and you help them up. Well, there's a strength gain that comes from that inhibitory nervous response. So the second thing we train is central nervous system. We're either looking at that inhibitory nervous response, trying to recruit more motor neurons, or we're looking for a change in the autonomic nervous system with recovery. So we're getting our nervous system to function differently, to more efficiently. Or the third thing we want from training is enzymes. We want a modification of the enzymes that we're producing that do all the things that we need to do to grow tissue, to make neural connections work better, to have energy to do the work that we need, because ultimately it all boils down to energy. ATP, you got to have ATP available. Well, that's an enzyme thing. So we're training for one of those 3 areas, and your program needs to address that. Okay, don't think that you can go in and train muscle fiber strengthening and connective tissue and neural tissue and enzymes the same way. They change. And this is where the strategic application of force and conditioning varies from athlete to athlete and sport to sport. You know, Rylan, you and I can be on the same team and the coach works up a workout, but you know, you and I may have very different strengths and weaknesses, and I need to work on one thing, you need to work on another. You know, one of the things I tell athletes, if you go to my website, trainrecoverwin.com, I've got a podcast section back there, and one of my podcasts is on the integrated athlete development model. So there's 3 sides to that. There's psychological, physiological, and skill. And then off the 3 sides, there's 10 pillars. And what I tell people of those 10 pillars, you win on your strength and you lose on your weakness. Okay, so you've got to look at this at a comprehensive level and say, okay, what is my weakness? When I was starting out, I was cutting too much weight. I wasn't strong enough. I was getting injured. My weakness was strength. I fixed that. I quit cutting weight. I started training better. And all of a sudden, I'm in the starting lineup. My first year in the starting lineup, I was 6-12. Of the 12 losses, I was winning 11 of the matches when I got pinned. I couldn't get off the bottom. So it was a technical problem. So I went to a camp that summer and learned and became unrideable. There was a camp out in Granby, Virginia called the Granby School of Wrestling. And when you understand their series, you become unrideable. So I go from 6-12 to 39-9 in 1 year just because I'm not being ridden anymore. And then of the 9 losses that year, 7 of them took place in dual meet situations in our home arena. And so all of a sudden it was an anxiety issue. So I was losing on mindset. I was losing on anxiety. I couldn't lose on the road. I couldn't win at home. And so I had to work with a sports psychologist. For me, it was quick cut and weight, get strong. Second time, it was technical, solve the technical problems. And then third, solve the psychological issues. My strength was good. Listen, I was an upper body lock guy. If I got you locked up, match was over. And that's how I won. But the question is, how do you lose? And you got to solve that too. And I think this is where the strength coach can help the coach identify this comprehensive athlete development model and make that part of what you do, not just bench, cleans, and squats.
I love that. I love that you're really amplifying that it's holistic. It's a holistic approach to coaching. You nailed down a really important thing for people to look at. It's like, you win on your strength, but you'll lose on your weakness. And so that's where a lot of your training needs to go in your strength conditioning. It's like, we don't need to bring up the strength that you're already good at. You want to maintain it. And if you have a power athlete, and you mentioned this, and I want to highlight this, the deadlift thing, where it's like, if you can deadlift more than twice your body weight, like it's no longer going to make the impact. You're far beyond where you need to with your sport. And so let's kind of dive into that a little bit. You had seen very interesting research, and I couldn't remember if it was like 2 times your body weight or
No, we did it. We did this work that with the wrestling team at Ohio State. What we did was, I had this, and again, this was not special. Okay, this was just me collecting data on the athletes I was working with. Now, what was unique about it was the fact that I had some data people to work with that really helped me move the needle on this to understand how to apply it. So I have 40 guys. I have 40 guys on the team. Of those guys, 9 of them were All-American or better. So I had an Olympic gold medalist, an Olympic bronze medalist, national champions, 6 in the country or better. The second group was a group of athletes that had worn our singlet. They had made the starting lineup, but they had never made All-American. So we made the cut score between the two. They started for us, but they never made All-American. And then the third group of athletes was a group of athletes that had never started for us. They're on the team. They train with they're very talented. There's multiple time state champions in that group, but for one reason or another, they just couldn't make the starting lineup. So we used those 3 groups, and then we went back and ran correlations. This is when we had the 3.5 million point data set, and we looked at everything. Okay, so I collected strength data for this because what I did was I had a manager come into the room, and whatever our focus exercise was that day, we did not focus on benching, squatting, cleaning, and deadlifting all the same day. We varied that, okay? There were focus days. So we took the focus exercise that day and we recorded the best set. So if for me back in my day, that 480 for 2 would have gotten recorded. That got recorded into a Google sheet that went to a Google form that went to a Google sheet, and that Google sheet I had built a little algorithm in that used the equation for estimating max. And this is all over the internet, and it's free. Okay, it didn't cost me anything to do this. And I estimated the maxes on every focus exercise an athlete did. Then we would take that data and we would simply graph it. I would simply take an athlete's individual response. So you filter the spreadsheet, you graph the max, and it's either going up, it's going flat, or it's going down. It's pretty straightforward. That was one of those things where I could say to an athlete, well, listen, you should be getting stronger. If you're stronger, your maxes should be better. Let me show you what's happening here. And these kids had never seen this. And this is free. Okay, what I'm talking about, you don't need an elaborate athlete management system to do this. This was free. And then what we did was I took that same data set and I would estimate what their projected max was for the next workout. And then we would put an equation on that so that if we're doing like a 10-8-6-4-3 kind of thing, that I basically wrote the code. And this is just these are Excel equations is all it is. You can learn this on Excel. You can Google Excel equations. You can learn this. Sure. So it would tell you what the weights were for their workout the next day. And that would get printed out and stuck to the wall. Guys would come in to do their workout. And here's your workout that day. Everyone was different. You have a different max than I do. I have good days, I have bad days, but we're always looking at that and we're always tracking that. And we did that for everything. But what we did when we ran correlations against all of our data sets, again to those three groups, deadlifting 2.25 times your body weight, right, predicted your ability to move from group 3 to group 2. Okay? Now, deadlifting 2.5 times or 3 times your body weight, we had people that could do that. There was no stronger statistical relationship. Okay, 2.25 was where it was max. Okay, so what we learned from that is like, okay, once we hit that, great. Okay, we're done worrying about that. You've got the necessary to move. Once I move you from group 3 into the starting lineup, I have other stuff I have to worry about to get you to All-American level. And so that was typically cardiovascular fitness or muscular endurance, or it was psychological or skill like it was with me back in the day. But we eliminated strength as a limiting factor. And this is what's really important. This program I'll tell you, I've never trained a team where I've lost a starting athlete to injury. Okay. My programs are typically very efficient. They're effective because we measure the effectiveness. We look at this, and if I'm able to get the strength benefit either from stronger tissue, improved central nervous system performance, or improved enzymes, if I can get those with less work and less investment and less struggle and less, so that they're able to put time into the things they need to work on, I get injured less. I'm improving the mechanism, and I'm not forcing my athletes towards that injury boundary.
Well, I think that's, again, coming back, that holistic approach. And I think it's so important for athletes to appreciate you want to hit one realm, but you got your 3 different, kind of pegs that you want to hit. And, you can be super strong, but then you're going to peak. Right. And so, I have, again, a lot of boxers and, other athletes that listen to this podcast, and I'm curious about how you went about programming muscular endurance, because sometimes boxers almost go too far into muscular endurance or don't know how to go about it. And, I was even trying to think about programming this for my athletes, but it can get so close to overtraining in some of those higher rep ranges, just doing like excessive work. So how would you usually try to prescribe this, or how would you recommend even boxers or athletes try to prescribe it so that it's not overworking them?
Rylan, here's what we've learned. When it comes to strength training, everything works. Okay. If you lift weights, you'll get stronger. Okay.
Totally.
What we know is that if we're flirting with overtraining, if we're flirting with the fact that we're training so hard, it's leading to maladaptation. So I like to talk about adaptation and maladaptation. Okay. So overtraining is maladaptation. If I'm training so hard that I'm flirting with maladaptation, I have crossed the point of the what's the word I'm looking for here? I've crossed that point of effectiveness so far ago. Okay. Now, this is where technology comes into play. What I just noticed? I went to the National Strength and Conditioning Show in June in Baltimore, and I was excited to see there were probably 3 force plate there companies, showing force plates. There were multiple force measurement tools, velocity measurement tools there. You can buy a velocity measurement device now for $250.
Wow.
Okay, I was paying $2,500 to $5,000 for these things. Okay, the price has come down dramatically. We now have jump mats, and there's cool laser jump mats that are very affordable. They're, we used to compare this technology to the cost of a treadmill. A treadmill runs $3,000 to $6,000. Okay, how much does a power rack cost? If you're getting a big, nice power rack, you're in that for a couple $1,000 to $4,000. Well, now we're talking about, man, these devices are down in the cost of a kettlebell. Okay, yeah. They're dramatically lower, which is, again, it's called Moore's Law, that every year technology will become twice as strong and half as expensive. Right. And we're in the middle of that right now. When we were doing our original HRV data 20 years ago, the devices were $1,000 a device. Now, you look at an Oura Ring, you're $300. And listen, right now we're recording on Black Friday. You can probably get that for a quarter of that. And they've got a new version coming out, the Oura Ring 4. I think the 3 is I don't think the 4 gives you anything you need. The 3 is great, and the only thing that makes the 3 better than the 2 is the battery life. So the quality of the data is roughly the same, and the prices just keep coming down. So this is part of that opportunity we live in. But the point I want to make is that we think of sports science as the techie guys that runs the device. Mm-hmm. Okay. Every time you move a weight, you create data. Okay. Right. We create an opportunity to create a data set every time, every rep. All we have to do is put, and Rylan, what I did not have time to design programs and make all this work. I had to go get managers to come into my room. And so we created a form for them that they filled out. So all the athletes' names was on it and everything I wanted. So, these were these are college freshmen and sophomore kids that are just recording. They go pull up that Google form, put all the data in, and I never touched it, but it all flowed to me. Mm-hmm. So looking for the right support. The other thing that if you need help with your data management, do you remember the movie Remember the Titans?
Oh yeah,
the football movie.
Great movie.
Okay, do you remember when they're going into the state championship and they went to the statistics teacher or the mathematics teacher and they gave him the tendencies, the defensive tendencies, and it came from that. Okay. There are people around you. If you're a coach, there are people around you in spades, okay, that can help you with this. I went to the big data guy at Ohio State and said, listen, I've got all this information. I need help managing this. And he gave me an intern, a guy, and this is a data kid. Okay, this kid, the idea that we made him a manager, he had the opportunity to earn a varsity letter. He got to be part of the program. He loved it. I got more out of him than I could have gotten out of any paid position. Okay, but if you go, these people are out there, and they're available. Don't be afraid to make them part of your program. Sit back, be the top of the pyramid, paint the vision, but bring in the tools that you need, whether they be electronic or just data or human, to go ahead and start to get these data sets evolving, so that you're thinking about it, not necessarily worrying about, do I need to order more treadmill mats or something?
Right. Yeah, no, it makes sense that you want to make sure that you're tracking the recovery and make sure that the athlete's actually coming back from it. And so that you recognize it's not pulling away from your actual performance. I got caught up in it a lot when I was a boxer. The No Pain, No Gain, the Rocky movie,
right.
The pain is a normal part of the process. I legit always told myself that the exhaustion.
And it may be at the right time.
At the right time, for sure. Okay, but then when you're going to spar someone and you're supposed to run that guy in sparring, exactly what happened to me is like a guy who I never had a hard time, I couldn't touch. And I didn't recognized that my body was just not letting my heavy motor neurons fire. I couldn't move fast.
Right.
And he's beating me to the punch. I'm like, oh, this is evident now. And you want to not get to that point in performance training. Like, it's a whole different thing when people are going for hypertrophy training. That can happen. But when you're doing it in performance-based training, it should be far removed from that. And we should always be feeling better. And so, like you say, using some of these data points, like you say, the jump mats are great. And to just be able to, have the communication with your athlete. Are you feeling faster or slower in the ring? And it's super important to create, like you say, data points and paying attention. When it comes to the overtraining, though, and just to come back to it, whether it's muscular endurance or even cardio, and I'm not sure if you've seen this in wrestling, I see it in boxing. Only thing that they think that they need to do is a bunch of push-ups and a bunch of running. And it's just like, I wish people had more concrete understanding of, okay, there's a time and a place to go for a jog, but it's not probably what's going to push you forward. What do you think more athletes need to appreciate when it comes to even the cardio aspect?
Data. You need a heart rate monitor. Okay. We live, back when I first was introduced to heart rate monitors, I was teaching at a community college in Columbus, Ohio at the time, and we were teaching exercise professionals. This is how you measure your heart rate. 2 fingers on the carotid.
Classic. Yeah.
Okay. Then I started working for Polar. And I was working for a division that was not heart rate monitor based. It was another computer based. But all of a sudden I have access to all this technology. And all of a sudden you put this strap on and I've got this thing on my wrist and it's not about what my heart rate is. Okay. What it is about what has my heart rate been for the last hour or hour and a half? What was the objective of the training program? And can I go back and take and review, did what I do in that last hour and a half contribute to my objective? Okay. Right. We know the value of zone 3, the value of zone 5. We know the problem with training in zone 4, but unfortunately that's where most athletes are. That's where we feel it. That's when they go run, they run till they feel it, and it's a black hole. Okay, this was, so this is what's so important, whether it's boxing or wrestling or any other sport, is the work that you're doing most effectively contributing to the outcome that you're looking for. And this is where technology. Rylan, I don't know how you train cardio and not have a heart rate monitor on. Right. Okay. If you don't, you're leaving money on the table. You're kidding yourself. Okay. And they're just so affordable now. A very high quality heart rate transmitter is $80. The software on your phone is free. And the amount of data that you can get from this is mind blowing. Okay. And a coach, if you're a coach and you want to start to look at this, get one of your own. It's a mistake for a coach to try and figure this out by putting technology on their athletes. It'll be a disaster. If you're a coach, put the technology on yourself. Figure it out first. Then take the technology and put it on one person. If you're coaching 8, don't hook up 8. Hook up 1. Go to the one that needs help. Go to the one that's trying to figure things out. This is how we started the HRV program at Ohio State. We had one athlete that was maladapting dramatically. It was affecting his ability to contribute, and we fixed that one kid. What was funny about it, Rylan, is that so the coach, the head coach brought this kid to my lab at my house away from the university. I said, here's what's going on. This kid's maladapting. He's not adapting to the training you're doing. You have to start training him for the training he's ready for, not what you think he should do. And the coach said, how do we do that? I said, well, you use technology. We use heart rate monitors and heart rate variability, and we figure this out. And he says, can you do that? And I said, sure. So literally we got what was called an Omega Wave heart rate monitor. So this was Omega Waves. Literally, I got the second transmitter from this new version into the country because a girl I'd hired at Polar had moved on to vice president of sales at Omega Wave. And I called her up. I said, listen, I need something. She said, I got what you need. She sent it to me. That's what we started doing. But we go into the wrestling room. I wire him up, and we figure his anaerobic threshold's about 163 to 165 beats a minute. Excuse me. He goes in, starts to drill, nice, moves up to about 140, 150 with some heavy drilling. As soon as he started to wrestle live, heart rate went to 190. Okay, boom. Okay, and I'm like, no, you're out. Because he was maladapting, he was overtraining, he was creating too much cortisol. So we had to get him to a place where his body trusted that it had the capacity to do the work and not do it anaerobically, not go straight to that anaerobic energy system. So we pulled him out. The coaches in the room looked at me like I had three eyes. Okay. They were like, "What are you doing? We have got to train these guys." I said, "You may need to train those guys, but this guy is not prepared for the work you want to put him through." Mm-hmm. So I modify 9 of his workouts. We modify him. We get him through Big Tens. We do some changes. He winds up being an All-American that year. And no one would have ever guessed this. Very talented wrestler, a 3-time Pennsylvania state champ, which is really hard to do. Very talented kid, but by backing up, we got better. So the coaches that were looking at me like, what the F, all of a sudden he makes All-American, the team wins a national title. The next meeting I'm in, they're like, "Okay, tell us about this voodoo you do." And all it is just understanding physiology. So the next year we put in bikes in the program that were wattage controlled. So we cut our running program by 90%. Okay. I put people on bikes. Okay. Running is a poor conditioning tool. It's very cheap, but it's very poor. Okay. And I understand where it is, and you know what? I train marathoners and half marathoners. And when they start with me, I put a heart rate monitor on them and I tell them, "I don't want your heart rate above this number." They come back and they say, "I have to walk to stabilize." And I said, "Then walk." Okay. But we've got to get your body prepared to produce energy sub-threshold. So we build the aerobic part of your system, which supports everything else. Everyone hits their PRs. Everyone gets to race day. None of my athletes get injured. Okay, because they get to race day. The biggest challenge with training a distance athlete is getting them to the starting line. It's not getting them to the finish line; it's getting them to the starting line. Right. So this is the same thing whether it's a wrestler or any other sport, a boxer, a hockey player. It is: do you have the ability? Again, those enzymes. Do you have those enzymes available to produce the ATP necessary to do the work to be successful? And understanding aerobic, anaerobic, how to program that, but then be able to monitor it. You cannot monitor it like this. You can't do it. This is a joke. Okay. Right. We have technology. It's like telling a NASCAR driver to monitor their speed by counting telephone poles around the track. Okay, that's how ludicrous this is. Yeah. Or an F1 driver for if you're not into NASCAR. It's absolutely ludicrous. But when we start to use some of these very approachable, very proven, very affordable technologies, they're game-changing for the right athlete and the right coach.
Absolutely. And I really love that you pulled into this idea for people. It's like actually backing down is what you need. It's just so counterintuitive for an athlete that's ambitious. Like, I got to go. It's like, actually, if you're 190 right now, you're just not ready for this. And, that could even pull into psychological issues and psychological stress of the athlete. Yep. And you mentioned HRV, all this data that, we don't have to just feel things out all the time. And it's, it's dangerous too, because we can just lie to ourselves or just be, believing that we're capable of something we're not, or not know why we're not capable of the thing that we should be. And I want to come back to the bike though. I love that you point that out, because I get why running, like you say, it's affordable. I think it's good for speed and zone 5 stuff, because it's one of the best ways and efficient ways for that.
Absolutely.
But like a low impact form of zone 2 cardio, I'm a huge fan of. Is that kind of where your methodology goes? Like, put them on a bike. You can like grade the potential. You set the tension. You set the timing. It's so much more controllable than going for a jog without all the, and no joint impact.
And this is how I came by this. Ryland, by the time I graduated my 5th year at Ohio State, I'd had 5 knee surgeries. And I was big. I was a big, strong guy. Going out and running beat the daylights out of my knees. So I started riding bicycles to condition. Then I really threw myself when I decided to stop wrestling and just get away from the sport. I wrestled nationals in 1985, and I didn't step on a wrestling mat for 10 years after that. Wow. I kind of, but I invested myself in cycling. I became a USCF cycling official, coach, and so forth. And And then we had the evolution of Lance Armstrong and his coach Chris Carmichael, and that's where a lot of this science comes from. Chris Carmichael figured this out too. You can say what you want about Lance. I mean, he didn't do anything that everybody else wasn't doing.
Everyone was doing it out there.
But what he did was he trained better than everybody else too.
For sure.
So, which made a difference and gave him the ability. And so, it's just a matter of time. But yeah, the ability to look across, I remember when I learned about training below threshold. At the time, I was using an elliptical for a lot of my training, and I came home. I was in Colorado Springs at his school, and I came home and I got on the elliptical and I was using my heart rate monitor, and I dropped my level down about 20 watts. To stay there. And all of a sudden, every time I came and trained, my wattage had been fixed for almost a year. I couldn't get past this one particular wattage goal. I back off about 80%, stay in zone 3, and then keep working. And then you just saw my training wattages improve. And what you learn is that as your base threshold training wattages improve, well, your max improves too. Okay. It's all built on that. So if you're a hockey player, if you're a boxer, all these things go hand in hand. The challenge is, and if you're a coach or you're an athlete, why do people do it? Well, the brain kind of plays a trick on you that when you get into zone 4, when you're really creating lactate, when you're really pushing this, your brain creates dopamine. Okay. Right. This is a survival adaptation. Okay. So you feel good. Your body, because your brain thinks when you're training in zone 4, it thinks you're being chased by a lion. Okay. And it's going to dump cortisol so that you have what you need to release the things that you need to get away from the lion. But it's also going to say, here's some dopamine too, just to keep you happy. Okay, just so depression doesn't kick in and you quit. So that's one of the challenges that we have. Why do we train at that level? Because we feel good. You get done and you're jazzed. Okay.
Yeah.
The problem is with that cortisol, you have a whole new recovery structure. Okay. I can train sub-threshold daily, multiple times a day. I can trigger the signals for improved cardiovascular enzymatic production multiple times. Okay. If I train zone 4, I can do it once. Okay. Right. Maybe once every other day. I was a good friend of mine, good cellular physiologist. This guy played football at OSU when I was there, and he's gone from USC to Tennessee. He's down at Texas A&M. And he was doing work. We were talking about muscular remodeling and the role of stem cells and androgen receptors and so forth. And he said, Mox, we were doing some work, and what we found is that if we created delayed onset muscle soreness, and then we measured the ability to generate power from that particular movement, you didn't get 100% of your power back for probably 7 to 10 days. Wow. 7 to 10 days. Okay. The soreness may be gone in 48 hours, but the central nervous system is governing you dramatically there. So delayed onset in muscle soreness, yeah, you feel good. You get up the next day, you're like, man, I had a good workout. Okay. I get that. Okay. But you don't have the performance benefit of that for another week.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So know that. This is where things like blood flow restriction training come into play. Rylan, I think this is the future right now when we start to take a look at what are the hacks. And what is a hack? A hack is a shortcut to the goal. It comes from the programming language. How do I get this code done? How do I hack it to get it faster? Right. Well, this is a hack for physiology. How do I hack the process? Well, we use technology. We measure. First of all, we start by measuring. We make sure that we're dealing with authentic data, not feelings. Okay? Because feelings will mess with you every time.
So much. Yeah.
So... Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You had a little bit there.
But this is our challenge. So things like blood flow restriction training. My podcast, you'll see it if you go to that Train, Recover, Win and go to my podcast. You'll see I'm posting one up there with Sten Stray-Gunderson. Sten is one of the founders of Be Strong Blood Flow Restriction Training. His dad was Jim Stray-Gunderson, who's one of the leaders in this. And we lost Jim a couple years ago. Sten's now an associate professor down at USC, University of South Carolina. And we've got a podcast coming up on that. Blood flow restriction is an amazing training hack. And you know what? If you want to feel bad, go do some blood flow restriction training with half the load. Okay. Yeah. You'll feel bad. You'll get that. But you're going to trigger the adaptive response faster and at a lower load. So I'm going to get the benefit with less of an investment and risk of injury.
Wow. Yeah.
That's what's cool.
And on top of that, I guess it never occurred to me. I look at it in like rehab populations. I look at it in injuries, right, in recovery. But you would use this for athletes in order to use lighter loads and better recover. Is that what you're saying?
You know, this is what I was talking to Sten about. And Rylan, listen, I don't know what the modern training environment's going to look like in 10 years. Okay, wow. But I want to work on ideating that concept. Okay. Yeah. And what I know about blood flow restriction training, if you're training athletes in a decade and you're not using BFR, it's borderline malpractice.
You're behind it. Yeah.
You're just behind, and you're leaving money on the table. If you know, I've been working with heart rate monitors in this concept for 30 years now. And the idea that they're not fully adapted and accepted yet just blows my mind. But listen, I'm optimistic. I keep staying on it. You know, so much. Every time I see an athlete get injured, every athlete injury I see, I take a step back and I wonder, what could we have done? Because the injury is when the system is exposed to a load it's not able to adjust to. Okay? So the question is, how could I have lowered the load so I have more resiliency and more capacity? Or how could I have created a load that got me stronger with the same amount of work? Okay, right. That I could have gotten a great amount. That's what when I see an injury, that's what I think about. And I think this is what. Listen, when you create your data set and you start to do this, if you're a strength coach, you have to go back and look at injuries. That's why we do what we do, is to help people keep from getting injured. You know, that's where it comes from. Oh, there's a performance benefit, yes. But the number one benefit is you show up for practice every day and you're at the game and you can compete. If you're injured, you can't do that.
100%. You know, all this stuff you're talking about, just it's managing the stress of everything. You know, the number one principle in health is the same for every strength coach: do no harm, prevent them. And it's like, everyone comes to you for, I want to get strong faster. Like, you know that you're going to put that on BCD. Like, everything is being resilient in your sport, because you got to show up for your sport. And right. I love that you really even addressed the effectiveness of DOMs, because that is, like you mentioned, zone 4 cardio, especially Gen Pop, they love that adrenaline rush. I always said that it's literally just an adrenaline rush because your heart's racing so fast.
Dopamine. It's a dopamine rush.
It's dopamine.
Rush.
Totally. And and athletes crave this because their sport gives it to them. But like, Charles Poliquin was talking about, the central nervous system is more than just 48 hours. It takes a long time. And, Louis was doing 8-day cycles. He was going more than just the regular asynchronous training. So you had mentioned this, and I want to hand this quote again. I love it. You're a strength, conditioning, and recovery coach. And so you have to look at the whole model, because no adaptation takes hold until it's recovered. Absolutely. And then you're able to perform with it. So let's talk more about your website, because it looks like you have this amazing holistic approach, and you're now able to help people more on the internet with it. Yeah.
So just listen, I've been farting around trying to get this put together for years. And I finally, a month ago, I said, damn it, let's do it. So I put together trainrecoverwin.com. You'll see tools that I like. Like there's products up there that I like. HRV Plus is a product we talked about before. The things like STEM Regen, things like Be Strong training bands. There's going to be more stuff. I'm going to continue to add that as a resource, and I want to put the education with it. I just recorded a podcast a couple weeks ago that's up on that site. It's with Ben Reuter. Ben's a professor at University of Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, and we opened the podcast. And if you watch my social media, particularly like Instagram and LinkedIn, the first quote that's going to show up is that I've started watching college football games, and one of the games I play now is see if I can pick out the strength coach on the sideline. Because they've kind of become caricatures to a certain degree, and I'm like, and you know what? I can pick them out most of the time because they don't look like the other coaches. Now, is that good or bad? I don't know. It's different. Okay. And when you go look at these coaches, or you look at the description of them in the university websites, they're a game changer. They create accountability. They do this or that. And, I've taught the exercise sciences and strength and conditioning for over 30 years now. And the thing that we use to teach this is what's called the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning from the National Strength and Conditioning Association. And no, there's not a chapter in there on being a game changer. There's not a chapter in there on accountability. They just created a new text and a new certification on sports science, which is going to start to look at accountability or tools for that, but they're not quite there yet. But my point is that the execution of our profession and the application of our profession can be different, the expectation. And this is what I want to see merge in the next 10 years. Or see what that facility looks like. Does that facility look like, if you're boxers, listen, I would bet dollars to donuts that in 10 years, every boxing glove of an elite boxer will have a device in it. Okay. And coaches will be able to monitor hand speed. And there will be a point in that workout where we become exhausted, and it'll show up in the data. Okay. Track and field coaches do it with a stopwatch and go out and run 400s. And when they can't run a 400 so fast, you're done with the workout. Well, this will apply to boxers. Okay. Because we'll have technology that can do that. And we're going to see the emergence of improved boxing. Okay. Sure. Because the coach is going to know when to stop, because once what we know neuromuscularly, once the ability to produce the force is gone, I don't care how much you yell at that athlete, it's not coming back. Mm-hmm. You have to recover. You have to begin the recovery process. And so all of a sudden, so whether it's bar speed, whether it's bar speed with lifting, or hand speed with boxing, or track speed, with an athlete, look at cyclists. I love velodrome work. Velodromes are wonderful because they're all set spaces. We can see everything. We can put time. The timing in cycling is ridiculous. Okay, we can throw heart rate in on top of that, so we can see when that signal hits, because training past exhaustion produces nothing. And we have so many coaches, well, I'm just trying to build character, or this kid's soft. And I'm like, I don't give a shit if you're trying to build character, and I don't care if you think the kid's soft. Beating the kid up after you've crossed that point is doing nothing but moving him closer to injury. You're not getting closer to success, you're getting closer to injury. Period. End of story. That is very clear. Okay, so our challenge is between now and then is how do we more effectively help these coaches figure this out? How can they integrate this in? How can we create the filters of quality so that we know when to stop?
Right. Yeah, I think that's very well stated, and I'm really excited to see this website. I'll check it out myself. I think that's cool. The kind of information that we need, even as a coach myself, because I'm the athlete that just wants the hard workout too. And then, part of yourself feels like, oh man, I feel like I left something on the table. It's like, you didn't. You practice the high intensity, the ideal form. I see it more evident with myself with powerlifting than I ever did as an athlete, especially because powerlifting is intended on rest. It's intended on recovery. So, it's kind of evident to you where you can't move the bar as fast. And you're okay with resting. Boxers and certain athletes think if it's too light, too much rest, we're not working. And you almost got to give them something to do instead. Go do some mobility, go do some breath work or some core work just while you're resting from the main focus, because they're so hyper fixated on intensity. And then it's like, go dump that into practice, let your coach handle the other part of it. But this is a great message. I think this is awesome. So why don't you leave it off with, well, first off, I want to know, what is your most recent ambition? You talked about traveling. Is there anything else coming down the pipeline that you're really excited about?
No, I'm putting a lot of time into getting this website up and getting this podcast going. I've been on podcasts. I've been on your podcast. I've been on tons of others. And I've always said, I kind of have an approach that I want to dig into and understand it. So I call my podcast Life Over the Horizon, trying to look at what's going to be there in the future. Rather than when I went to the national convention in July and I walked in, they were asking the same damn questions we were asking 30 years ago. They're doing the same shit. Okay. And I'm like, if you went into your doctor's office and they were doing the same shit they were doing 30 years ago, you'd walk out. Yeah. So the question is, how do we get this to a point to where we're at 10 years ahead? Okay. And we live in an amazing time. We hear this term AI. Okay. Well, AI is really a combination of two things. It's machine learning and large language models, but our ability to apply AI to things like Oura Ring data and all the other things that we do, our ability to communicate, our ability to figure this out is really, really interesting. And so if you're a coach and you're afraid of it, go find help. Okay. If you're a coach and you're afraid of it, go get your 12-year-old kid. Okay. Because they know it. Okay, yeah. They know it. Or go to your school's mathematics instructor, or go to your data department at your college. These are all places where you can go and you can find people to help you with this, because this is what's really transitioning right now.
I think that's great. Well, why don't you just leave that one last bit? Where can they find more about you?
If you want to find, if you want to get a hold of me, the best way to do it is either LinkedIn, go to Don Moxley on LinkedIn, or if you go to trainrecoverwin.com, there's a contact me link there. Put it in, fill in what your information is, and you know what? That's how you get me. Trainrecoverwin.com or LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Don. I'll hopefully reach out in the future. I love talking strength conditioning with you. I really
appreciate it. Thanks, buddy. I can't wait till we do it again.
Thanks again to Don for that discussion. I really think he's a well of knowledge. He has so much to actually contribute and to help give people more of the science-backed ideas that people wouldn't believe if I told them. So the first one I got to hit on the head is the power training, and that it's so important to appreciate that your power training, something that you want to be really strong at, has to be done well. You still want heavy weight, but that heavy weight doesn't have to be taken to the point where you're moving the weight slow and your form might break down. As he mentioned, you have to actually make sure your body knows how to do the movement. Your nervous system has to be comfortable actually holding the weight, and it should be doing it well. Once your form starts breaking down, this is where you want to reserve reps. And once your speed starts slowing down, then you're not keeping to the ideal form. The thing that you want to find is a nice in between. You want to challenge the weight that feels heavy. But if you have some speed without the momentum slowing down during the rep, you have a good strength rep. But once you're doing, maybe it's, as you mentioned, 10 reps, right? Let's say you start doing it, you're on your third, fourth, or fifth rep, and it starts slowing down. You're noticing less momentum. This is when you can actually hold reps in reserve. Again, this is specific to strength building, power building. Now, if you want to actually build muscle, we want those last few reps or very close to it. And so it's very contextual on what you're trying to achieve. If you're an athlete, just try to build your strength. Unless you're an athlete in off season, in which case you're trying to build some size, then you want to put those extra reps in. And so it helps so much to pay attention to the intention of the movement. And these would be more for compound movements like your squat, bench, deadlift, any sort of multi-joint exercise, your squat, hinge, push, pull. And this will actually help you so much more. Still make it heavy. Don't be afraid of the heavy weight, but be aware that when you're doing heavy weight slow and it's not moving with a lot of speed, it's not giving you the same gains. And I think that's something that I'm hammering home on all my athletes and myself and seeing great dividends from it. The other thing that I know I took from this was paying attention to the wearables. And I have not really sat into HRV monitors yet. And I have to. I think this is just me being late to the game. I am probably going to get the Aura Ring and try it out because I'm very interested in it. I'm very interested in knowing the science and the data that's out there. And just the fact that he was able to say, I could predict which athlete was going to make the team or do well or make it to the next round based on their HRV is enough to say, hey, this information will dictate or tell you what's going to happen. Is this person recovered enough? Is this person ready to actually compete at the highest level? They're not. So we know that they're not going to do well. And if you're an athlete and you really care about the result, maybe this is the information that you got to start gathering on yourself, and you'll pay attention to, am I getting enough sleep? Am I getting enough recovery? Or are you just grinding too much? As I mentioned in my own story, I'll never forget that week of training that I was pushing so hard because I thought I was supposed to. I was doing 2 heavy lifts a week, a conditioning day. Thought I was doing all the right things. I was even following some textbooks for some of these workouts, but they were too much. And, you know, the textbook has one thing and I'm a whole different other being. And was my recovery up to stuff? Well, I was in a deficit. There was a lot of things going on. And then only way that I knew was I've had a bad performance. You don't want to have a bad performance teach you that you're doing too much. If you have these wearables, these trackables, this will actually tell you, hey, you're not recovering enough. You got to pull back. And even his story about how he had some athletes where it's like, they're just not even ready for this kind of intensity. That's another really important thing. So another major thing that I'm going to do with my athletes, and I'm going to test on myself, is I've been late to the game, or more or less just, I want to say complacent to paying attention to using heart rates during cardiovascular training. We've been using a lot more of simple metrics. If some people have some wearables, it's not too hard to keep them in zone 2 or zone 3, but to be able to actually pay attention to what the recovery is like. Are they bringing down their heart rate between the rounds? Because that's really, if you're doing something intense, it should bring up your heart rate, but how fast can your heart rate go down? And that's what he mentioned. What does it do over the course of the whole hour? How much of recovery can you get? Where do you like, later on in the day? And knowing that this technology is out there and I'm not using it, I do feel like I'm being complacent to it. And he even mentioned the blood flow restriction. I think, again, I'm late to the game on this. I know that it's out there. I've looked at it more so for injured populations. And most of the time, my clients, if I do get them injured, they just rest. And I think I'm going to be pushing them more towards the blood flow restriction so that you can still do it. The thing is you essentially, you're going to cut off the blood flow. You can put it on your leg. You can put it on your arm. You cut the blood flow so that it creates less venous return. So the blood can't pump back as easily. When you go to do your weights, the leg or the arm that's being restricted will actually develop this muscle burn. And so you just can't go really heavy, but it has a stimulation to maintain muscle. I'm not sure if necessarily strength, but maintain muscle. Given that if you have an injury, you can maintain muscle in that state because the injury will prevent you from going really heavy. So this is great for rehab populations, but as you mentioned, maybe it changes the way a lot of people train, especially during their season. They want to use less weight, but they want to maintain muscle. This could be a possibility. And I haven't even experimented with it enough to really understand how much of a placement it has. And a lot of people are very excited of it. So I do need to dig deeper into it because I do think there could be some good applications. The one downside is that it's restricted to the muscle groups that are on the limbs. So you can't restrict the blood flow from your chest. You can't restrict it from your glutes. So it would be anything on the hip below, wherever you could cut it off on the leg, and it would be on your arms. So it'd be like your triceps and biceps, forearms. So it is limited to what exercises and muscle groups it can be helpful for, but it is a really fascinating realm of research that I know I personally need to dive more into. And luckily you can get these things on Amazon very cheap. I think that was one of my hesitations. I'd seen some people just wrap some bands and that didn't seem safe. And I'd heard that it's not safe to just wrap. You want appropriate tensions so you're not doing it too much, but it has been encouraged by many people to try some blood flow restriction. So it's something I got to dive into. And I hope you really take the lesson of zone 4 cardio not being necessarily the most beneficial thing for sport performance, because your sport's going to do that anyways. So if you're doing, you're boxing, you're just going to end up in that state. You're going to end up in a high lactic, it's not lactic, but high acidity state. You're going to end up dealing with a lot of these exhaustions. But what you'd rather do is you'd rather train individual parts and components of your cardiovascular system that are all going to help you deal with that state. So if you do a bunch of zone 2, zone 3, your aerobic system can help get rid of all that muscle acidity burn between rounds, or anytime you're less active or you're less intense during a round or whatever sporting event you have. Then what you'd want to do is you also want to train your high intensity, your zone 5. So you're super efficient at being explosive. Like, you're really good at being explosive. So when you're doing some of your zone 5, which would be a very small portion of your training in comparison to zone 3 or 4, or zone 3 and 2, your body's used to doing that and doing it very efficiently. So you're very powerful and explosive. But to do zone 5 effectively, you need to give yourself big rest so you don't end up, as he mentioned, the lactic threshold. Lactic threshold is essentially when your muscles create a lot of burn, and it could be anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. When you start to get that burning feeling, basically your muscle gets very acidic, and that's why it decreases its ability to move fast or produce force. And you don't want that to happen. As you mentioned, you'll get DOMS, you get soreness. And I love that he pointed out, it takes like 7 days. It can take longer. And I've heard this before. I've heard it from many people. The CNS, the central nervous system, takes way longer to actually be able to produce that force again. So you got to be really careful when you're doing zone 5, you're doing high intensity stuff, how much you demand from it and how sore it's making you. Soreness is like a very gratifying thing for some of us. But if you're an athlete, you actually want to minimize it as much as physically possible if you want to keep building up your ability to do things well. If you're muscle building, totally different. You expect soreness, expect DOMS. It's actually an indication that you've done something. But again, if we want to have performance, we don't want to be restricted, right? We don't want to feel like we're breaking ourselves down. It's actually way more about learning and building yourself up as far as efficiency. So think that sports performance is about performing efficiently. Think about muscle building as a lot more break and rebuild, even though it's not technically breaking you down, but it's going to feel like it. So I hope that association kind of gets cleared up for you a little bit more. I also want to mention one little extra thing here that's coming down the pipeline for my program, and that's actually going to be something free, completely free. I'm going to have a do-it-yourself fitness group on Facebook, and this is essentially if you want to figure out your own training plan, you want to figure out your own meal plan, but I give you all the tutorials, all the resources that you need in order to make these decisions. I give it to you for free. You got a whole portal on all the videos, plus a Facebook group that actually helps support you. And we're all answering questions in there. I'll be doing Instagram lives to answer any questions that people have about it. It's all free, 100%. So if you're someone who maybe, after the holidays, you want to spend more money on training, but you're so close to figuring it out and you think that if someone just gave you the path, the steps, you would do it, you'd follow it and get results, then by all means, let's jump into this do-it-yourself group. That's going to be popping up right at the end of the year, right after Christmas, somewhere around there. But pay attention to my Instagram, watch my newsletter, and I will be releasing that info as it comes out. And if you have me on Instagram or on my newsletter, just mention to me DIY. I want to be on the wait list. I'll put you on the wait list so that you can join that group when it gets going. But that's about it for today. Thank you so much to Don Moxley. This was a really fun conversation. We talked about how I might go on his podcast. I'll certainly have him on for another one because I just love listening to these experts that have been in the field, that have seen real science applied to athletes, the things that athletes wouldn't really know, and getting great results for them. So I'm certain he's going to be on again. Go check out his website. He's got a ton of great info on there. Go check out his podcast. As you can tell, he has a ton of knowledge to offer you, and I'm certain it's going to help you. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with another athlete or anyone else that might be really interested in exercise science. And thank you as a listener, as always. I always appreciate you coming on here. If you enjoy it, please leave a 5-star review on Spotify, YouTube, whatever, because it does certainly help this podcast grow in some way. And as always, I really hope that this helped you with your own ambition, going after what you care about, because that's what it's all about. Life isn't about the pursuit of happiness, but rather it's about the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.